Hello there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Friday, November 4th, and tonight we're talking about jobs.
October jobs report to show us roughly 200,000. It's a beat.
That is slightly better than economists expected.
3.7% is the unemployment rate, so it went up a little bit, but still near that, 50-year low.
The government's latest jobs report shows hiring is strong. What is the Biden administration doing to keep improving the economy? And how does all of this affect our chances of a recession? President Biden's senior advisor, Gene Sperling, joins us next. The midterms are almost over. It's the last weekend for candidates to reach voters before Election Day. Both major parties will send their top surrogates to Pennsylvania, and Republicans are pushing hard in Wisconsin. We'll have the latest from the campaign trail. Plus, Elon Musk is making major layoffs at Twitter. Many staffers who worked on fighting misinformation lost their jobs just in time for Election Day. More of our exclusive reporting is just ahead. And today marks a century since the discovery of King Tut's tomb. You'll get a closer look at the artifacts this fascinating pharaoh left behind. So we've seen plenty of polls showing the economy as issue number one for voters, including some of our polls. Today, we got a new look at the job market ahead of Election Day. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says the nation added 261,000 jobs last month. Some economists had predicted just 200,000 more jobs. Unemployment went up slightly from 3.5% to 3.7%. The report does show a strong job market, and that is good news for the Biden administration and perhaps for Democrats pushing for more votes. But the Federal Reserve has raised some concerns. It's been trying to cool the labor market and slow job growth by hiking interest rates. Now, that may sound strange, helping the economy by slowing employment growth. But it's all part of the Fed's efforts to limit inflation. The administration welcomed today's jobs report. The president called it, quote, evidence that our job recovery remains strong, unquote. And he added that inflation remains the administration's top economic challenge. Joining us now is Gene Sperling, senior advisor to President Biden. Mr. Sperling, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So what do you make of this jobs report? How does it fit into the administration's economic plans?
Well, I think it was a very solid jobs report. It was 261,000. We saw another big jump in manufacturing jobs, which are now 137,000 stronger than they were even before the pandemic. We saw unemployment still at a low level, 3.7%. But we're seeing strong, solid job growth. But we're also seeing job numbers that are more stable and consistent with the type of solid growth and lower prices we will need to have and want to achieve without having to give up this historically strong job market that we have.
There are a number of initiatives the president has to try to get the economy back in a place that's livable for many Americans. The American Rescue Plan is pretty vast. You're the White House's American Rescue Coordinator. Where are we in terms of those overall plans, and how does this jobs report fit within that?
Well, for one thing, when I was National Economic Advisor during the Obama administration, one of the things that was very painful was that President Obama could never get a second recovery package from the Republican Congress. And as a result, we saw state and local governments contracting, laying people off. Today, you saw gains in those numbers. You see state and local governments adding to GDP. You're seeing strong manufacturing jobs numbers. And I believe that what the American Rescue Plan did through things like the child tax credit was not just bring down poverty and child poverty, but it's given a bit more resilience and breathing rooms to more families. And that is one of the reasons why we feel we are better positioned than most countries to deal with some of the pain that we're going to get from our central banks and still be able to transition to more stable growth and stable job growth with lower prices without, again, giving up the strong gains that we've seen, really historically strong jobs gains that we've seen under President Biden.
You tweeted something today about these latest job numbers. You tweeted, the economy has added 4.068 million jobs under President Biden in the first 10 months of 2022. Other than at POTUS's first year in 2021, that is the most jobs created in the first 10 months of a year in U.S. history ever. Does record job growth sound like a recession to you? There's a YouGov poll that shows that 58% of Americans say they believe we are in a recession, 43% of Democrats, 75% of Republicans. What do you say to Americans who believe we either are or are headed for a recession?
Well, I think we need to take a balanced and accurate view of the economy. I think what you're hearing from those Americans is they're unhappy that the fact that we, like every country in the world, is dealing with, global inflation due to this unprecedented pandemic and unthinkable war of aggression in Ukraine. And the fact that it's global is not a lot of comfort for a family going through the grocery line or the gas line. But we have seen gas prices start to come down. They're down $1.23 from their highs. And that should not be, that pain that we totally understand that comes from higher prices should never be discounted. But it's also important to understand that this is a very strong time for American workers, that 10 million jobs is a historic amount of jobs created in just 20 months. And what I was referring to was, even you see Republican critics trying to go out and say it's a recession or seem like they're rooting for a recession. So, yes, we have to recognize that people are feeling the pain in the United States from this global inflation due to the pandemic and war. But that shouldn't confuse people with the fact that we do have growth. We do have strong job growth. And I was just trying to say, hey, if the first 10 months of this year, you haven't just seen job growth, you've seen, other than last year, the greatest job growth in the history of the country. That is not the type of job record that you associate with a downturn or a recession.
There have been some concerns, though, expressed by the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. He referred to the labor market as, in his words, overheated, and said that wage gains were way above what will be consistent with the bank's 2% inflation target. I'm sure that some people would scoff at that and say, yeah, my wage gains are not there. I'm still paying more than I can afford, even with making more money. Prices are outpacing wages for me. I know a lot of people who feel that way, but how do you see that interplay between job growth, the job market, and the ongoing fight to keep inflation under control?
Well, absolutely we understand that interplay. There are certainly millions of Americans who have gotten new jobs and raises that have given them actual wage gains. We saw last quarter in the GDP numbers that there was 1.7% in real gains in disposable income. That said, there is no question that there are also tens of millions of Americans who are giving away part of that raise or all of that raise they might have gotten in higher prices. And that's exactly why when this president wakes up every day, he's asking, what can we do to reduce cost and prices for typical families? Now, obviously we can't do everything. We're not the Federal Reserve, but there are things we can do and we are doing, like a historic release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which has helped bring down gas prices by $1.23. In fact, today we heard that the two most typical prices at the typical gas station were $3.19 or $3.39. That's improvement. The president has also passed measures to lower prescription drug costs, insulin prices, health care premiums by $800 for 13 million Americans, thousands of dollars in savings for people buying new appliances that are energy efficient. And so what we're really trying to ask is who out there is fighting for you every day to lower your costs, to lower prices. It really has been the president, and it's unfortunate that the Republicans have not only not worked with us, but have really gone out and said that if they control both houses, their goal is going to be to repeal these very measures that the president has done administratively or with the Democrats in Congress to lower prices, particularly prices for many senior Americans and those who rely on insulin or drug or prescription drug are affected by insulin and prescription drug costs significantly.
Well, we will certainly see how the midterm elections affect the president's economic plan and his ability to keep all of these policies in motion. But for now, Gene Sperling, senior advisor to President Biden, appreciate you making time. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
Now, the economy is just one issue candidates are talking about before the polls open on Tuesday. Republicans and Democrats are sending presidents to Pennsylvania this weekend. Tomorrow, President Biden and former President Obama will stump with John Fetterman in Philadelphia. Former President Trump will campaign for Dr. Mehmet Oz in Latrobe, that's east of Pittsburgh. Latrobe, by the way, is the hometown of the late Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers from PBS. But one Democrat just got the endorsement of another TV icon. NBC's Dasha Burns has more on all of that. Hey, Dasha.
Yeah, Joshua, it's about to be a very busy weekend here in Pennsylvania. You've got Obama, Biden, and Trump all here on the same day, all stumping for their candidates. But a name that's perhaps even bigger than all three of those, Oprah Winfrey getting into the fray. She endorsed John Fetterman. Now, normally celebrity endorsements take them or leave them. But in this case, because she is credited with helping launch Dr. Oz's career, they've known each other for many, many years. This is something that Fetterman is certainly going to be talking about for the coming days. He's already been on The View today talking about it. Take a listen.
I mean, she's an icon. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's an honor, and I'm so grateful. And, you know, she understands what's at stake here in this race. And as like I said, it was just incredibly honored to have her support in this race. Truly.
Oz responding to the endorsement first to NBC News, the campaign telling us Dr. Oz loves Oprah and respects the fact that they have different politics. He believes we need more balance and less extremism in Washington, and that is a message that you've heard a lot from the Oz campaign over the last few weeks, really trying to push a moderate lane for himself, using words like stability, civility, trying to paint Fetterman as more extreme. We'll see if that works, especially with this rally tomorrow where he will be on stage with Trump and Doug Mastriano, the Republican candidate for governor, who is much more extreme and whom Republican voters tell us is maybe a bit too far right for them. Meanwhile, Josh Shapiro, the Democratic candidate for governor, who's here at a Union Hall today, is miles ahead in his race, and Democrats are hoping that perhaps him being so far ahead might help pull up the rest of the ticket and potentially help John Fetterman here too. Joshua?
All right, thank you, Dasha. That's NBC's Dasha Burns reporting from Luzerne County in northeast Pennsylvania. Let's move over to Wisconsin now. Republicans are campaigning in Green Bay, one of the state's most divided cities. GOP Senator Ron Johnson teamed up with gubernatorial candidate Tim Michels. They talked about crime, inflation, and called out Wisconsin's incumbent governor.
Tony Evers, his liberal cronies in Madison, are trying to tear down the fabric of our society.
Meanwhile, there are growing election concerns in Milwaukee. A top election official there faces felony charges. Prosecutors accuse her of fraudulently requesting military absentee ballots and sending them to a Republican lawmaker. So far, more than 580,000 Wisconsinites have cast their ballots. NBC's Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Milwaukee with more. Shaq, first of all, tell us a little bit more about what's been going on with the Republicans on the campaign trail and how it seems to be resonating with voters.
Well, Joshua, one word that you're hearing from both of the top Republicans, Tim Michels and Ron Johnson, is that they're going into Election Day feeling cautiously optimistic, but they say they want to run through the tape. And, you know, one thing that we got was that Marquette University Law School poll. This is the gold standard poll in the state of Wisconsin. Both campaigns were watching extremely closely. And starting with that Senate race that you see there, you see Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, the Democrat in this race, is behind by about 2 percentage points. But a big thing to look at in this poll is, one, that's still well within the margin of error. And two, it shows a much tighter race than it did even just last month. And then there's the governor's race, where you have Tim Michels going up against Democratic Governor Tony Evers. That race literally could not be any closer. Both candidates standing at 48% in that poll. So both sides saying that this is going to turn into a turnout game. It's a jump ball. That's a phrase you continue to hear. And that is why you see both of them and many of them out on the stump, whether doing bus tours or van tours. They're trying to get their voters energized, Joshua.
Senator Johnson has been among the Republicans who have cast repeated doubt on the 2020 presidential election. Do we have any sense of how these candidates might deal with Tuesday's results if they don't win?
Well, that was a question that I asked Senator Johnson directly. And, you know, just a sense of why that question came up. This is a senator that has made election integrity essential to his campaign. His campaign established an entire website to allow voters and his supporters to report so-called voting violations, a hotline that he says will be then reviewed by his campaign attorneys. So after President Biden's speech earlier this week, I asked him, in light of that speech, do you commit to accepting the results of Tuesday's election? Here's a little bit of his response.
Do you commit to accepting the results of Tuesday's election?
I sure hope I can, but I can't predict what the Democrats might have planned. You know, we're not trying to do anything to gain partisan advantage. We're just doing whatever we can to restore confidence. It sure seems like there's an awful lot of, in the past, a lot of attempt on the part of Democrats to make it easier to cheat. We want to make it easy to vote, but very hard to cheat.
He pointed to some specific headlines, essentially, that came out of Wisconsin this week. One out of Green Bay, where the Republican National Committee sued election officials there, essentially to give election observers more access to the certification process of absentee ballots. And then he pointed to the report out of Milwaukee, where an election official was actually fired there for, as you mentioned earlier, fraudulently requesting absentee ballots, essentially to make a point about a loophole that was in the system, Joshua.
Yes, Shaq, tell us a little bit more about that situation in Milwaukee and what it is exactly that got this person in trouble. They were sending a small handful of military absentee ballots to a Republican official who, as I understand it, has cast doubt on election results in the past. But what's the upshot of all that?
Exactly. 3 ballots in this case, essentially to point out a loophole in the election law. Let's first start by saying the Elections Commission says that this is not going to have any impact on the counting of votes or the legitimacy of the election on November 8th. This is separate from it. This was something that was caught, and the person is now being prosecuted. What she was trying to point out was that in the state of Wisconsin, military electors, military voters can go online using a state system. They don't need to be registered, and they do not need to provide any identification or even proof of a residence. She went on, she made up some fake names and had those ballots sent to a Republican lawmaker that has cast doubt on the 2020 elections. According to police, she did that so that that official would be distracted on what she considers a legitimate loophole in the law rather than some of the illegitimate complaints that have come from this state legislature, in her words. The bottom line is this was against the law. She's facing 4 counts. One is a felony count, including official misconduct in public office. She's also facing 3 counts of submitting false statements to obtain or to vote an absentee ballot. Collectively, she faces about 5 years, up to 5 years in prison. One thing again, this is not affecting the vote totals on November 8th. Election officials, the mayor has said, while this is a serious breach of trust, this is not having anything to do with the validity of what we'll see on Tuesday night.
All right. Thank you, Shaq. That's NBC's Shaquille Brewster with the latest for us from Milwaukee. Still to come, layoffs at Twitter. We are learning more about some of the folks who lost their jobs, and Elon Musk faces a lawsuit over the way he laid these workers off. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. What do former employees at Twitter think of Elon Musk's layoffs? Today, one insider told CNBC, quote, Elon will own a company without employees, unquote. The company once had 7,500 workers. Now, many of them are out of jobs, and some appear to be venting about it on Twitter. To be clear, we don't know if all their jobs ended in these layoffs or for other reasons. One staffer tweeted, well, it's been real. The official and very dehumanizing layoff email has been received, adding, the best may be yet to come, but for now, I'm absolutely gutted. Another writes, 8 months pregnant and have a 9-month-old, just got cut off from laptop access. Hashtag love where you worked. Last night, a company-wide email warned employees that the layoffs would begin today. It described the cuts as, quote, an effort to place Twitter on a healthy path, unquote. Today, a class action lawsuit was filed against Twitter. It claims that the company broke federal and state laws requiring 60 days notice of mass layoffs. Cuts like these were among some workers' fears ahead of the acquisition. Today, Elon Musk appeared to confirm that roughly half the staff has been let go. And tonight, a tweet from his verified account did not respond to the lawsuit directly, but it says that the layoffs came with 3 months of severance. He says that's 50% more than the law requires. Musk added that right now the company is losing more than $4 million a day. Let's get into all this with CNBC contributor Tim Higgins. He is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Higgins, good evening. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
What's the latest that we know about the extent of these layoffs and what Twitter workers or former Twitter workers are saying about them?
Yeah, they're not happy, as you'd expect. It's never fun to get laid off, but it's especially painful when it comes in this manner, by email, so impersonal, and also just after months and months of kind of confusion and chaos over whether this deal would actually occur and then what would take place. Elon, tonight, you just showed that tweet saying that he's losing $4 million a day at Twitter, and that's in large part because of all the debt that he had to take on to buy Twitter.
This is happening just ahead of an election here in the U.S., and a tech reporter for Bloomberg, Davey Alba, tweeted about Twitter's role in curbing misinformation. He has written that Twitter was, in his words, one of the most responsive platforms when he covered the 2020 presidential election, proactive in labeling posts. And part of our reporting shows that these layoffs hit very hard the teams that were responsible for dealing with misinformation on Twitter. So the timing of all of this ahead of an election kind of can't be ignored.
Yeah, it's absolutely a big concern to a lot of people. The head of Twitter's safety out there on Twitter himself trying to make the case that they are taking this very seriously, saying that the teams that deal with moderation, content moderation, were only cut by 15% compared to the 50% across the company-wide, making the argument that they still will have the muscle to do what they need to do. We'll see. We also see independent studies that suggest that hate speech has surged on the platform since Elon has taken over, and Twitter executives even on the platform saying that they've been kind of stepping up those efforts in the last few days to combat this ugly speech that we see on Twitter.
Put all of this in context in terms of the overall story of Twitter, kind of where it's been and where it's going. Twitter's had a really interesting history from the days of, Biz and Jack to its relationship with just the city of San Francisco, getting the tax credits to get that building, to its struggle to be profitable, and then Dick Costolo, and then Jack Dorsey coming back, and now Elon Musk. This company's had kind of a wild ride over the last few years. So where is it now in its lifespan?
Well, it's another season of a kind of giant soap opera in Silicon Valley to see what will happen next, right? The issue here now is that Elon has taken on so much debt to acquire this company, that he essentially is under the gun to start generating more revenue. Then, on the other hand, because of these concerns about hate speech, about the direction, all the uncertainty, we're seeing increasingly more and more advertisers saying, whoa, wait a second, let's pause the spending. And so you've got kind of a horrible recipe here for Elon. You've got the money that was coming in, 90% of the revenues come from advertising, and a kind of a race to figure out how to slash spending and create new revenue. And that's kind of where we're at. What's the new Twitter going to look like? That's really hard to say right now. And it kind of is part of Elon's kind of history of how he addresses business. Oftentimes the ends in his mind justify the means. And so traditionally, he's had some kind of messy periods, dramas, great soap operas at places like Tesla. And now we're just seeing that kind of circus, if you will, move to Twitter.
How do his plans for the future of Twitter look right now in light of everything that's happened lately? There's been so many tweets about the whole verification thing where he said it'd be $20 a month, and then Twitter kind of poo-pooed that, and then he was like, it'll be $8 a month, going back and forth. Stephen King said he wouldn't do it. Like, how does that revenue plan, including paying for verification, look these days?
It's really uncertain to, I think, everybody at this point, except perhaps Elon and his inner circle. And that's really some of the challenge, I think, for the employees that remain, but also the ones who were kind of shown the door. A lot of uncertainty here. What is this company going to look like? We hear Elon talk about how he wants to use this platform to kind of build his idea of the super app, the kind of the app to rule them all that would be more than just a communication tool. It would be a commerce tool, an entertainment place, a place where all your digital life could potentially live, similar to what we've seen in China with super apps there, but never really here in the U.S. Now, that's a huge dream, and at this point on today, as the day ends, that's looking like a long way off, and it's going to be very difficult in the next 90 days, 6 months, a year.
Before I got to let you go, tell us a little more about this lawsuit. The plaintiffs are claiming that Twitter violated a federal law and also a California version of that law called the WARN Act. What is it exactly that they're accusing Twitter of doing, and does it look like they have a case?
Well, we have to get into the details, and these things are always really messy and thorny as we get into it. But essentially, the idea is they have to give, in California, these employees a certain number of days, time notice about these huge layoffs that a company does. It's unclear exactly how Twitter has structured these layoffs in California. We know that some have been promised pay for several months, and Elon is out there saying that 3 months of severance. So really the details are to come out. And that's part of the issue with this set of layoffs is it's been so messy. The communication on all of it has really been really kind of a what not to do in corporate governance.
CNBC contributor Tim Higgins of the Wall Street Journal. Appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including a new aid package for Ukraine, the acquittal of a close ally to former President Trump, and the South Korean military scrambling after threats from the North. Tonight's headlines begin with more U.S. assistance for Ukraine. The Department of Defense says it will provide another $400 million of military aid. The package includes refurbished tanks, armored boats, missiles, and more than 1,000 drones. The U.S. has committed nearly $19 billion of aid to help Ukraine fight this war. This latest announcement comes after Russia's threats of a nuclear attack. A Russian diplomat discussed these threats and concerns over a so-called dirty bomb with NBC chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine last February, the threat that a nuclear weapon could be used in conflict has increased dramatically. Senior Russian officials up to and including President Vladimir Putin have said that Moscow could deploy every weapon in its arsenal to defend its interests, with Putin adding that he's not bluffing. Some U.S. officials say that the threat of a nuclear war hasn't been this high since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which came at the peak of the Cold War. Now, the latest twist was an accusation from Russia, saying that, in fact, Ukraine was getting ready to deploy a dirty bomb, that is, a conventional bomb packed with nuclear material, which could contaminate a large area. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, dispatched a team of inspectors and recently released its findings. Earlier today, I spoke to a senior Russian diplomat here in the city of Vienna, a city that has long been a hub for international diplomacy, going back to the Cold War, and he tried to de-escalate some of the rhetoric surrounding nuclear weapons. Moscow warned repeatedly and accused Ukraine of preparing to use a dirty bomb. Yes. The IAEA just did some inspections and found no evidence of that. So where does that leave you?
May I ask you one specific question? Did you really expect that a dirty bomb would be waiting for inspectors somewhere in the open? Okay, Moscow decided to bring this issue into public space, just a preventive measure to stop possible use of dirty bomb. And I believe this task has been achieved.
Officials in Washington said that this was all an attempt by Russia to create a pretext or try to create some sort of situation that Russia could use to escalate the war.
I know.
What do you say to that?
It's the view of Washington. Let's see if we are going to use this situation to escalate. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. We fully subscribe to this formula.
Can you see a scenario in which Russia would use nuclear weapons in Ukraine?
No, in Ukraine? No, I don't.
That senior Russian official said there are still two circumstances in which Russia would consider using a nuclear weapon. One, if it's attacked with a nuclear weapon, and two, if Russia faces an existential threat, a threat to its very existence. But he didn't say what Moscow would consider to be an existential threat, leaving the issue somewhat vague.
That's NBC's Richard Engel reporting from Vienna. A longtime friend of former President Trump has been found not guilty of lying to the FBI. Tom Barrack was the chair of his inauguration committee. A federal jury deliberated for about 2 days in Brooklyn. Prosecutors had accused Mr. Barrack of advocating for the United Arab Emirates without notifying the Justice Department. He was also charged with obstructing justice and lying about it in a 2019 interview with federal agents. Tom Barrack has denied any wrongdoing. When asked about the verdict, he said, quote, "God bless America. The system is amazing," unquote. Tensions continue to run high on the Korean peninsula. Today, the South quickly scrambled fighter jets in response to the North's latest provocation. NBC foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez has more from Seoul.
The U.S. and its allies responding both militarily and diplomatically to North Korea today. On the military front, South Korea scrambling 80 fighter jets, including advanced F-35 stealth fighters, in response to what it said was 180 military aircraft launched by the North. Now, there's around 100 American pilots here in South Korea taking part in joint military exercises right now. They were put on alert, although they weren't ultimately scrambled. On the diplomatic front, the UN Security Council met today, the United States condemning North Korea's missile launches, especially that launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile yesterday, calling it a flagrant violation of UN Security Council resolutions. But the U.S. also accusing Russia and China of shielding North Korea diplomatically. Both Russia and China back in May vetoed a resolution criticizing North Korea. The U.S. now feeling there's very little headway to be made diplomatically as long as these two superpowers, both permanent members of the UN Security Council, are prepared to shield North Korea. The South Koreans are also sending their Navy out to see if they can fish the remains of that intercontinental ballistic missile out of the sea. They want to study it, see what can be learned about North Korea's missile program. A South Korean official telling NBC News they believe that missile was a Hwasong-17. That is the North's most advanced missile. It has a range of around 9,000 miles. In theory, it could strike targets anywhere in the United States. The South wants to see what it can find out if it is able to locate the remains of that missile.
That's NBC's Raf Sanchez reporting from Seoul, South Korea. Tomorrow night, someone could win the largest lottery jackpot in world history. Powerball is up to an estimated $1.6 billion. That's paid out 1 year at a time or as a one-time lump sum. The lump sum would be worth more than $780 million. The prize grew after no one matched all 5 numbers on Wednesday. The next drawing is tomorrow night at 11 Eastern. Coming up, Kyrie Irving's latest controversy raises more concerns about anti-Semitism in America. Why are some African Americans expressing these views? We'll get into that just ahead. Stay close. Brooklyn Nets star Kyrie Irving is apologizing for promoting an anti-Semitic documentary. Last night, the team announced that he is suspended for at least 5 games without pay. The Nets said that he is unfit to be associated with them right now. Last week, Mr. Irving linked to the film's rental page on social media. He's since deleted that post. After the suspension, Kyrie Irving posted an apology on Instagram to, quote, all Jewish families and communities that are hurt and affected from my post, unquote. He wrote that he initially had an emotional reaction to being labeled anti-Semitic rather than focusing on the hurtfulness of the documentary. He went on to write, quote, I had no intentions to disrespect any Jewish cultural history regarding the Holocaust or perpetuate any hate, unquote. Today, the Nets general manager said the apology was a step in the right direction, but certainly not enough to end the suspension. The team wants him to meet with Jewish leaders before returning. Yesterday, Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, reacted to the apology.
In this fight against hate, you have got to be optimistic, you have got to be positive, and you've got to be vigilant. Yeah. So we're going to take him at his word and hold him accountable.
Joining us now is Rebecca Pierce. She's a writer, filmmaker, and contributor to the progressive magazine Jewish Currents. Ms. Pierce, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, tell us about this film. What is it, and what is it within the film that caused such outrage?
So this film is a documentary that includes ideology about Jewish people and Black people that sort of claims that African Americans and other non-white groups in the U.S. are the quote-unquote real Jews, and that Jewish people are usurpers to that identity. It also really ties into Black Hebrew Israelite teachings. And this is a Black liberation theology-based religion that is a nationalist religion with many different sects. Some of those sects claim that they are the real Jews, and Jewish people from other backgrounds like Ashkenazi or Sephardi Jews are usurpers to that identity. And this is obviously very, incorrect and hurtful to folks who are part of the Jewish community.
For sure, for sure. Let me back up just a little bit in your explanation. You mentioned the Black Hebrew Israelites. Who are the Black Hebrew Israelites, and how does their belief system intersect with all of this?
So the Black Hebrew Israelites are a sort of Black nationalist religious group with, the roots are in the United States. And a lot of their theology takes elements of Christian teachings and also claims Jewish identity and sort of affiliation with the Jews of, the Christian Old Testament. And a lot of these teachings are rooted in ideas that really predate these groups and actually go back to European anti-Semitism and this idea called Christian supersessionism, which is an idea that Jewish people sort of failed in our covenant with God, and Christians are the correct heirs to that covenant now, which is why you hear this ideology about, African Americans being the real Jews and members of like the Jewish faith being not real Jews, being fake Jews.
This may be a weird question, but what do people who espouse those views get out of that? Is it kind of a sense of we're God's actual chosen people and not you? Like, is that the point of it?
That's part of it. You know, in the Christian manifestation, I would say, or sorry, the European Christian manifestation of that is sort of the bottom line. What you're seeing in groups like some of these Black Hebrew Israelite sects that believe this, and I want to be clear, not all of them do, it's sort of trying to rewrite the narrative of Black folks in America. One that is a really heartbreaking and painful story of us having our culture taken from us. And it's trying to rewrite that through this narrative of slavery to liberation that you see in the Torah and the Christian Old Testament, and sort of taking that on as a new identity instead of this idea that we are, you know, a formerly enslaved people whose culture was forcibly taken from us.
I wonder how you see the context around this story, given some of our other reporting here at NBC, that Ye, the artist formerly known as Kanye West, had to pay out a settlement to a former employee who claimed that Ye praised Hitler and Nazis during meetings. How do you see this intersection between anti-Semitism and people of African descent?
Well, it comes across in these two cases, both Ye and Kyrie Irving have espoused, in particular, teachings that are common in some of these Black Hebrew Israelite sects. And, you know, those teachings become, you know, people take them and they go even further with them and turn that into an animus against Jewish people. And I don't know that there is a 100% rational explanation for Kanye's behavior in this case, but the underlying theme that's connecting these two cases are the adoption of these teachings that I think the folks who take them on often see them as a form of liberation theology, as an alternative to Christianity that in many cases came down to us through slavery. And so they see that as a way out of that painful narrative and history. And they see the existence of Jewish people in these cases as a sort of obstacle to taking on that identity, because there are real Jews out here in the world who are practicing the Jewish faith, or not, you know, in many cases, because a lot of us are secular. But that becomes an obstacle to that narrative, and that can kind of become, you know, a basis for hatred in some cases. And there's also lots of complex history between Black folks and Jewish folks in the United States that helps feed these narratives.
Before I zoom out too far from Kyrie Irving, I do want to play one clip of an exchange that he had with a reporter before he had apologized for all of this. Watch.
To follow up on the promotion of the movie and the book.
Can you please stop calling it a promotion? What am I promoting?
Put it out on your platform.
But I'm promoting it? Do you see me in front of the
putting it out there,
the
people are going to say that you are
promoting. Yeah, put it out there just like you put things out there, right?
Yeah, but it's not.
You put things out there for a living, right?
Right, but my stuff is not.
So let's move on.
Filled with anti-Semitic.
Let's move on. Don't dehumanize me up here.
I'm not doing that.
Another human being. I can post whatever I want. So say that and shut it down and move on to the next question.
So that was part of his exchange with a reporter last week before the suspension and the apology came. You are Black and Jewish. I wonder how this strikes you, how this hits you personally in terms of not just these incidents, but a lot of what we've seen lately in terms of anti-Semitism that, at least to me, seems to be increasingly pervasive and in some cases blatant. How does this affect you?
Well, I don't like hearing that, obviously. I think that there's a lot of harmful things about the statements that are being, you know, put out there by Ye, that are being, you know, promoted by Kyrie Irving on his social media. And a lot of the harm for me comes down to the way that these platforms and these people have so much reach. You know, when Kanye West made his comments, anti-Semitic neo-Nazis were posting up in LA and other cities with banners saying Kanye was right about the Jews. There are a lot of people taking sort of the animus that's being expressed here and using it to sort of forward their own ideologies. So that's, I think, the most harmful part about this for me is the high level of attention that people like Ye and Kyrie Irving get when they share these kinds of ideas from their platforms. And for me as, a Black person, it does hurt to see my community talk about my other community this way. But I also know that there's a lot of us in the Black community who are rightfully speaking out against this and who are looking at who our collective shared enemies are as Black and Jewish folks, which are, the far right and the neo-Nazis who are pushing a lot of these ideologies and taking advantage of folks like Ye and Kyrie Irving.
I do want to note before we go that CNBC's Sarah Eisen has just tweeted, and there are a few other reports of this as well, that Nike has just announced that it will suspend its relationship with Kyrie Irving and that it's postponing the launch of the Kyrie 8. The statement from Nike that Sarah just tweeted states in part, "We believe there is no place for hate speech and we condemn any form of anti-Semitism. We are deeply saddened and disappointed by the situation and its impact on everyone." That is from a statement from Nike that was just shared on Twitter by CNBC's Sarah Eisen. Rebecca Pierce, contributing writer for Jewish Currents, I appreciate you talking us through this tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
100 years ago tonight, King Tut's tomb captivated the world. We'll look back at the discovery and look at some of what was found there before we go. Today marks 100 years since archaeologist Howard Carter unearthed the tomb of King Tut. The press raved over the thousands of artifacts inside, especially the 24-pound portrait mask made of solid gold. NBC foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiella has the story.
In Cairo, crowds from around the world flocking to Egypt's Antiquities Museum to celebrate the world's most famous pharaoh, King Tut.
I feel so proud. I feel so happy.
This month marks 1 century since the legendary tomb was discovered. The story and treasures found in Tutankhamun's resting place continue to fascinate millions around the globe. The artifacts, more than 3,000 years old and perfectly preserved.
There's so much to see.
This museum is incredible.
We were given a rare after-hours tour with one of the world's top Egyptologists, Zahi Hawass, to see the stunning artifacts up close. The only surviving throne chair from ancient Egypt, telling a story of love.
The king is seated, wearing his crown. Look at the queen. Kelly, this is the most beautiful love.
Bracelets and amulets, a gold dagger to protect the king in the afterlife, and the spectacular golden coffins.
It's all solid gold.
Oh my gosh.
Gold in Egypt was like dust.
Like dust. More than 5,000 pieces dating back to the 1300s BC.
Of all of the pieces that were found in the tomb, one really stands out.
That's it. This is the masterpiece.
King Tut's death mask, found resting on his mummified shoulders.
Look at the face.
Look at
the
eyes, the mouth. Incredible.
A face looking out from the past.
Greatest headlines of the century.
British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb November 4th, 1922. It was called the find of the century, the only tomb almost completely intact, telling the story of the boy king, 8 or 9 when he took the throne, and dead just 10 years later. Researchers now believe an infection from a broken leg killed him, and they're still learning about his life and reign.
How much more do we know about ancient Egypt because of this tomb?
From the tomb, we can understand many things. Love stories. What kind of amulets they use in their life. The religious belief. The belief of the afterlife built Egypt.
We traveled 20 miles south of Cairo, where archaeologists are uncovering new clues in the desert sand. Like these ancient amulets unearthed right in front of us.
Wow, look at that. It's a good luck charm?
Yes, it's the ancient Egyptian put it with the dead to protect him in the other life.
In the afterlife?
Yes, and to bring the luck.
There are shafts all around this site. This one's already been opened, but it hasn't been fully explored. This one's still covered. Quite simply, they don't know what treasures might lie underground.
You are going to see something amazing. Are you scared from mummies or anything?
I don't think so. We'll find out.
Follow me.
Follow you on that ladder.
On that ladder.
Okay, here we go.
Some of Tut's top generals and advisors were buried here. On this morning, a new discovery.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
In a burial chamber, a 3,000-year-old coffin.
And we'll see how his mummy in a good condition or not. Are you ready?
Has anyone seen this before?
No, this is the first time. They take the lid out, it will not damage anything.
You have to be very careful.
Yes.
Obviously, this is 3,000 years old.
Careful.
Uncovered.
Perfect. Watch out.
A woman who may have lived during Tut's reign. Her story, a mystery.
But how much more is there left to discover here?
Until now, only 30% of our monuments. Still, there is 70% is buried underneath the ground.
Egypt's ancient secrets still waiting to be unearthed.
That's Kelly Kobier reporting. I'm Joshua Johnson. Thanks for making time for us. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.